All right. What up, everybody? So thank you for joining me today on our House of Aten Podcast. So we're gonna talk about a couple different topics that have been occurring in our society today. So we got the situation. I don't know if y'all just heard, but this news just came out with the Stop Woke Act. And what the latest is with that, that's the initiative that the Republicans and led by Governor DeSantis has tried to push through to essentially inhibit professors and teachers' ability to have conversations surrounding race, but also their perspectives and their interpretation on that. And we also got what's going on with Talarico and some of the issues currently in the Texas race at this point. So, he's the leader, but he ran against Jasmine Crockett, and there have been some issues with his interest, it seems, as in galvanizing surrounding the black vote and some of those issues. So we'll kind of talk about the perspective on that. Trump just recently spoke towards the black unemployment rate, and he was kind of celebrating some of those numbers that came out recently about black unemployment, but we're going to kind of discuss what the realities are versus what his perspective is and how have we been impacted on that since his election, since his second term, and if we are benefiting from that or not, and then what are some of those ties and reasonings as to why the black unemployment rate is where it's at. And then lastly, we'll kind of end off just talking about leadership and integrity and kind of what our expectations are from those who portray themselves or represent themselves as being leaders in our community, for our community, what that looks like, what our expectations are, and how you could just develop better leadership skills within yourself. What are some of those approaches that you can take as you try to develop yourself into a better person, which will ultimately make you a better manager at work, a better partner in your relationship, a better parent if you have children, and just a better neighbor and overall member of this society as a citizen of these United States. So those are just some of the topics that we're going to get into today. So first and foremost, I definitely appreciate you if you took the time out to join us for this particular segment. And remember to please like, comment, share, subscribe, do all of that. Let's blast this far and wide because I think that it is important that you have voices at the table who do offer these perspectives on our society, where we are, and to make sure that we are supporting those who are responsible as they try to get around leadership, brainstorming, and figuring out solutions to improve our community. So with that, we're going to get started on the first. Let me take something real quick. We're going to get started on the first topic. So let's go into this whole thing with this Stop Woke Act, and let's see what they got going on right now. So, all right. So Florida's anti-woke law restricting how lessons on race and gender can be taught in colleges and universities, which was a policy championed by Governor Ron DeSantis, violates the free speech rights of professors, a panel of appeals court judges ruled on Tuesday. So this went into place in 2022, and they essentially said that Florida's rules is positively dystopian, doubling down by arguing that the law is a breathtaking assertion of power to ban unpopular ideas from public discourse in a very classroom space where students are supposed to puzzle through ideas that are good and bad, easy and hard, ideally getting ever closer to the truth. So there seems to have been this limiting on what is spoken about, especially historically, in our colleges and universities here in the state of Florida. And there seems to have been like a limitation on having difficult conversations to help us navigate the history and the nuance during times as the enslavement era, navigating through Jim Crow and also the civil rights era, and really speaking to how some communities intentionally try to inhibit the progress of our communities throughout time, and then actually putting into perspective how redlining, how lack of access to bank accounts, how communities and neighborhoods that were constructed were then destructed by government, by private sector as well, and helping students to have conversations surrounding those different tactics and those different initiatives that were put forth. So it seems as if the Republican Party didn't want the truth, I guess, to come out, based off the perspective of how some of us felt in regards to those matters, because it would essentially hold a group, a demographic accountable, because there is a history, a continuation, a pattern of when another demographic in the United States of America has tried to live, has tried to exist, has tried to create their own communities and do for self. There has been this concerted effort to stop them and present obstacles at every turn. And by there being this very blatant demographic to do that, there may have been a segment of this community in the younger population who would have felt some sense of guilt, who would have felt some sense of remorse. And so, what the Republican Party wanted to do was they wanted to prevent those conversations from happening, and they leaned in on the extremist point of views to say that their kids or would be indoctrinated with these ideals. And, of course, when you lean on the extremities of a particular argument, there can be, especially with something as nuanced but as unexplored as the history between the majority, between white Americans and then also so-called black Americans, brown Americans. I say so-called because if you've been watching my show, my segment, you know how I feel about using the term black and brown. But not being able to talk about those issues in a responsible, guided manner has a lot of our community. And when I say a lot of our community, I'm talking about America, has a lot of us really not grasping and understanding the dynamics of how racism existed, whether it was personal racism or structural racism, which existed throughout institutions, where you start to see there is a disconnect or gross misuse of the law against one segment for another for the same crimes, and how that applied to the generational wealth or the wealth gap that we have here in this country. And it allows people, when they don't understand the true facts of the history, to then be filled with these ideals of that one group is trotting along, they're working hard, they're digging, they're putting their boots on, and they're going to work every day, while another is sitting on the sidelines essentially, and they are just clawing at handouts, right? They're not trying to actually work, build, invest, and do these things. They're just sitting there waiting on the labors of other people to then produce taxes that then produce handouts and giveaways to say, to one demographic. And that is not the truth. That is not the circumstantial evidence, does not support that argument. And so this is all that's surrounding that. And this is what he called the anti-woke legislation or Individual Freedom Act of 2022. And this has been blocked and was blocked as they were going through the courts to fight for the ability of this law to be put in place or for it to be removed. At this point, where we had the law come out, or at least we had the ruling, come out, where it was 2-1 against this particular Stop Woke law, which is a win for professors, universities, and academia, so that teachers can have tough conversations and be on the side of maybe not so popular thought in regards to this. And so we don't suppress that, because we have to understand that in universities that there should be places where you're not taught what to think, but you're taught how to think on different matters and issues. You're also taught how to research as well, so that you can come to an objective conclusion based on the facts. But those facts cannot be withheld. They must be able to exist within those classrooms, and then you navigate or you debate both those issues. So this was a huge win, and like I said, it came out today that this has been blocked. Now, of course, it is going to. Well, let me before we do that, let's see. Let's get into a couple of some of the statements, and this is what I was kind of talking about earlier. DeSantis said the law expanded Florida's anti-discrimination laws to prohibit schools and companies from leveling guilt or blame to students and employees based on race or sex. As such, it targets lessons over issues like white privilege by creating new protections for students and workers, including that a person should not be instructed to feel guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress due to their race, color, sex, or national origin. So, largely speaking, didn't want, again, like I mentioned, those students to be in the classroom to see what their ancestors did intentionally, and then for them to feel some type of guilt or anguish for the actions of somebody else beforehand. And, you know, every time we talk about, well, that was so far in the past, and what about today? Well, we talk about the benefits from slavery, the benefits from Jim Crow, the neighborhoods that they were able to inherit, the housing they was able to build, the wealth they were able to amass and accumulate. There's all this, well, my family or my parents or I did not own any slaves, or I didn't discriminate against anybody for employment. Yes, you may have not, but the society as a whole, in your society, you benefit from the product of that institution. You still benefit from the wealth that exists. And that's largely where the conversation goes with the reparations and this sort, and to say, yes, you need to give us back these things, or give us these things, especially when you think about things like the 40 acres and a mule, which was the Special Field Order number 15 that was by William Tecumseh Sherman, where they had allocated after enslavement, the Civil War, after, mind you, African Americans fought in the Civil War for their liberation, because if you go back to the Dred Scott decision in the Supreme Court, that I think it was Roger Taney essentially said that there's no laws that the white man must respect from the black man, which essentially put the nail in the coffin towards there being some type of liberation to get out of enslavement. So the country had to go at war just so the institution of slavery would no longer exist. And so about 179,000 African Americans, including Harriet Tubman, had some type of interest in the war to liberate themselves from under that oppressive institution of slavery. So, and even understanding that story and navigating all of the web that is woven from those intricacies of what existed, you know, that is what was important, and why a lot of us don't understand that and don't know that, which would demystify this idea that it was people within their hearts who all of a sudden had a change of heart and in their minds and said, oh, this is the wrong thing, so let us just not do it. That Dred Scott decision, understanding that's what led to it. And then afterwards, they had no choice but to give us the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment once we started to get the right people in office. But going back to the 400,000 after Lincoln gets assassinated, because, well, before let me back up, well, William Tecumseh Sherman went and he asked, I think his name was Edward Franklin Frazier, he asked, what is it that your people want? What is it that you all think you need in order to realize your true freedom and true humanity in this country? He went back, talked to people in the church, I think it was about 20 of them there, and they all agreed that they wanted land. So, because they wanted to be able to till the fields, they wanted to do their own work, they wanted to be able to grow their own food, build their own homes in these communities. So they gave them land throughout South Carolina, Georgia, and along the St. Johns River in Florida, and told them that they can divvy up this land, 40 acres or so, among those people. And it was about 400,000 acres in total. And what happens, long story short, Abraham Lincoln gets assassinated. And after Abraham Lincoln gets assassinated, you have Andrew Johnson come in as the presidency. And then he, because this is not a law, he essentially writes it out and says, I'm not going to enforce this as the president of the United States. And that land that those people have been living on, President Johnson instead takes the land and gives it back to the treasonous Confederate soldiers. And as those soldiers come back into that land that they once owned, they end up now kicking the African Americans from off of that land, or telling them, hey, they can't exist. And they end up taking back over control because there is no military there to actually make sure that there is a fair outcome for what exists. They were supposed to, but those things were not enforced in that particular area. So that is then how they lost all these swaths of land, and how they gathered all this land that they still exist on and live on today, and have built monumental companies, homes, and everything on this particular land. And this is why there is this argument for reparations, so to speak, as well as a lot more. But even that story, you're not even taught in school, right? I had to read a book down here. I had to read this book by Henry Louis Gates to even learn about that particular story. And then also this one here, Black AF History, the Unwhitewashed Story of America, Michael Harriot. So you can learn, but even so, let's say that you still disagree with it. Well, in college, or really in school period, but let's just stick with college and universities, you should still be learning these stories. You should learn these stories and be aware of it. And even if you don't agree, have a way to argue against it, but based on facts and not opinion. And this particular legislation was going to suppress that ability to have that conversation within the classroom, and many other conversations, whether you're talking about inventions or the sort. So some of those arguments that existed, this 2-to-1 divide on the panel. Let's go down here. Stated. I don't think they have, not in this one. It was in another article I was reading, but let's just go here. Today's important decision means that the college remains a place where professors and students are allowed to debate controversial topics, even if politicians disagree with them, said Greg Grubel, fired senior attorney. The DeSantis administration did not immediately respond to a request for comment about the ruling. However, State Attorney General James Uthmeyer, though, did throw praise at Lagoa. Barbara Lagoa may be the best jurist in our country, Uthmeyer said on social media. She should be on SCOTUS. Now, if you don't know who that is, she was one of the justices, well, not one, she was the only justice that was actually in dissent with this ruling. Let's see if we can find more of what she said first. Barbara Lagoa, a former Florida Supreme Court judge picked by DeSantis, wrote a striking dissent of the decision, contending the First Amendment does not compel all viewpoints to be worthy of state-sponsored endorsement. This panel is not free to rewrite precedent simply because we dislike where it leads, Lagoa wrote. And there was another article that had way more about her viewpoint in it than we do right now. But that's essentially the story on the Florida Stop Woke Act and the legislation and ruling for that today. And this will be going back down to another court for further decisions, which means it may also end up even going up to the Supreme Court as well, but we'll see. All right, so let's move into our next topic. James Talarico and black voters in Texas. So if you understand the dynamics, right, of the African American vote in Texas, right, and these outcomes. So when you look up places like Texas, Georgia, Florida, New York, California, as you can see here based off this thing, that Texas has the most eligible black voters in 2022, but DC, of course, had the highest share. And so now they are having this conversation, this issue, because remember, James Talarico went against Jasmine Crockett, ended up defeating Jasmine Crockett, which I'm going to talk about some of my outlooks on the problems in midterm elections when it comes to the black vote. But there was a segment where Roland Martin, which we're going to play it, where Roland Martin was talking to a representative from out there, because they just had their caucus, and they were just talking about representation and how the black vote for all these years they've been taking advantage of it. how do you connect with Black voters? What is it that they need to do? And then also talking towards dollars as well as like media, like advertising, political advertising dollars, and how they believe that in this particular upcoming election, they're going to spend somewhere between 11.6 billion and maybe 16 billion in political advertising, but those dollars largely do not go towards advocating and endorsing and soliciting Black advertisement, right? Those shows, I mean, this one could be considered that, right? As it grows and as it gets out to the population, I'm pretty sure, I would assume that I would have a large Black following and supporting. So then, in order for me to be able to market, advertise, pay for this message to get in front of people, then those dollars should flow through companies like this one. And then for me to be able to navigate and market towards the African American community and to have people on interview and to talk about what's important for our community and how do politicians reach out to our community, but then how do they also champion policies and legislations that improve our situation, like we're going to talk about the employment segment next. And so they feel like Talarico is not necessarily doing that. Now, I'm going to go ahead and play some of this, and we'll get back to this data right here, but I wanted you to see what the top 5 states were that have the largest African American eligible voters, because those are places where, I always say this, voting is an individual sport that leads to a collective outcome. So for those who have this idea, my vote is not going to change anything, that's the wrong mindset, because you're only thinking about yourself and not understanding how voting is a team sport. And so in places like Texas, Georgia, Florida, New York, California, if we were to show up in the numbers in which to our best abilities, we show up in those numbers to yield the best outcomes, we have a massive influence on the outcomes of elections. But when we don't, we lower our ability to impact that and to advocate. And then also when we don't show up in these preliminary times, like right now, to talk to politicians and to ask them, what are you going to do for our community? Here are, or present them with our issues and where are you at on these particular issues, then we hurt our chances to be able to swing the pendulum in our favor to have influence. But let's go ahead, let's get into this segment. All right, so having to come back, had a technical issue real quick. So we were talking about the voting. We were talking about the voting in Texas, and so we're going to get into a segment real quick so we can hear some of the arguments against that. All right. Cannot believe. All right, so let's go ahead and play.
He's sitting there like, okay, like dramatic effect. All right, what was the dialogue, and what is your honest assessment of right now? Here we are at the end of June. You've got 5 months left. The primary was over in March. We knew exactly who the U.S. Senate candidate was going to be, Talarico. We knew that Hinojosa was going to be the gubernatorial candidate. And so now we know with a ticket, in terms of the other statewide races, attorney general, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, those races. So, okay, where is this party when it comes to doing something and reaching out to the group of voters that represent the largest group of Black voters of eligible Black voters of any state in America?
So we go see. I reached out to Talarico in March. He has not wanted to have that conversation with me. So, you know, you can lead a horse to water. You can't make him drink. But I can tell you that I prayed, Roland, before I gave the speech, because they wanted for me to give like a rah-rah inspirational speech. And I just didn't think that needed to be said. And I wanted to let the Texas Democratic Party know from the main stage that they got a Black problem unless they fix it. And I've learned that Talarico controls the Democratic Party because he is the highest. He's at the top of the ticket. And since he won't listen and he hasn't responded, and he's ignored people, and he's told people that he's working with Black electeds, and he's not, for the most part. I just wanted to say it. I fully expected that Black people and Black delegates would understand. What really surprised, and I was prepared for white people to be angry at me because of white fragility, white privilege, and they always want to blame stuff on us and want us to be Captain Save-A-Ho for the Democratic Party all the time. I was seriously surprised that I got all of the ovations that I got standing up. So that was, I like that. I will say that there were some outlying white folks who were really upset and basically said that they took that I was saying we were going to hold the Black vote for granted. That's not what I said. I said there are things you can do, Texas Democratic Party, to get Black people to roll with you. Now, do I think that Talarico's refusal thus far to engage Black electeds and the Black infrastructure has put him at a disadvantage? Absolutely, because there's not a lot of time to try to rally us. But we actually had a meeting today, Roland, early today, where Black people, Black thought leaders, elected officials from Dallas and Houston met, and we are getting together and we're going to stand together. And hopefully Talarico and the Texas Democratic Party will see that and they will listen to us, because Talarico has given out money to white GOTV organizations and white infrastructure, and Hispanic infrastructure, but he's not giving it to Black infrastructure. And so either they'll listen or they won't. Again, even though I knew I could lose votes, I did it anyway, because sometimes in life you got to pick a side, and I need to know if the Texas Democratic Party is going to pick our side. I did speak with Kendall Scudder, the chair of the Texas Democratic Party, and he told me he would be meeting with me. Again, meetings do nothing if we don't have action into it, but I have already told them, Roland, they need to pay for Black infrastructure. They need to pay for media with you and not just CNN, and other people like you. I've told them that we have people like using hit strategies with Terrence Woodbury, who no one polls Black people better than him. We don't want no white pollsters. They don't know how to poll us. And for the most part, I've told them it takes money to get the vote out, right? Inspiration doesn't get the vote out. So Talarico needs to pay for us to get our voters out. Only then does Talarico have a chance to win. If he continues to do what he has been doing, I believe Talarico is going to lose.
So let me just interject real quick right there. And I mean, to her point, like, yes, you have to get the dollars, as I was saying, you got to get the dollars invested in the community. But what that looks like, how do you then reach out to not even just volunteers, right? Or how do you reach out to actually hire staff that knows how to speak to these different communities? We saw the Republican Party do that when it came to the Latino vote in the 2020 elections. We saw some of the hiccups that happened from the lack of messaging, right, from the Democratic Party to rural America, to men in America from Kamala Harris's party. We saw that there was a lot more money that was invested from the Republican Party to speak to young men. So there is a strategy and attempt that has to happen. But what they're saying and communicating is that that has not been happening. And there has always been this expectation because of how Democrats vote, especially African-American women. They are, I think, 92%. Or they vote for the Democrats 92% of the time. So they have this uber loyalty to the party, but they don't necessarily have the same return on investments. And so that's kind of what she's speaking to, and where we feel like Democrats have been falling short. And this is not just because what I don't want to do is get it confused as to where, because this is what I'm skeptical about, as now you're telling us what we want to hear, but then once you get elected, you're not showing us with hiring on your staff. You're not showing us with investment in the community. You're not showing us with new policies. You're not showing it by having us at the table. And we don't only want to be brought there for Black issues, right? We want to be there for issues on technology. We want to be there for issues on engineering. We want to be there for issues on other campaign development and how are we comprehensive plans for the planning of our city. What I'm saying is that we want to be there for a multitude of issues to represent the talent that exists in us and to not just placate us by bringing us to the table for crumb issues surrounding only things that plague minorities. So let's get back into it.
So we'll see. Talarico's campaign has not reached out to me, even though the most talked about speech from the Texas Democratic Convention, from what I see on social media and from what I hear, is the speech that I made, because that's the big elephant in the room. Because again, Talarico and everybody statewide and the Democratic Party has a black problem, whether they acknowledge it or not. And inspiration is not going to get us to the polls.
One of the things that that I have consistently been saying, and in fact, on Saturday, I spoke the Northern Virginia Pastors Association had a town hall, Freedom to Vote, and I was a keynote speaker. And I made that point that the bottom line is we're not interested in being sharecroppers. We're not interested in tilling the soil, and that the reality is the money has to be put on the ground. And even though Texas is an expansive state, huge state, 254 counties, a lot of ground to cover, everything can't be done just by putting ads on television. And the reality is we had Ashley Etienne on the show the other day. It was an op-ed.
He was there today, Roland.
It was an op-ed that she wrote in Houston Chronicle, talking about lack of black turnout in last two senatorial races, presidential race as well. And same thing when about putting resources on the ground. And at the end of the day, what I keep telling these candidates, point blank, is that the math is the math. The further you get away, as every day progresses, as you move forward, you are further away from the civil rights movement, and as each day progresses, you're losing baby boomers, people who came of age or who were in their, who were 18, 19, 20, in the 20s and 30s during the 1960s. And if you look at the data is very clear. 65 plus voters, black, significant numbers identify as Democrats. You go 55, 64, still a big number. You go below 54 years old, that drops. And I have been saying for years that Democrats are going to have to spend a minimum 4 times as much time and 4 times as much money than they normally do in order to reach black voters, because black voters are not as self-identifying as we used to. And I don't know what the hell these white Democratic strategists are smoking or sniffing, but they don't understand the real world in black America and black Texas.
But Roland, in Texas, it's not just the strategists. It's like the white Democrats. I had one of my white supporters be very upset. She texted me and was very upset because she thought I was threatening to withhold the black vote and that a really bad man, Paxton, was going to win. And I told her I'm not threatening anything, but I also told her, you literally cannot shame us into voting for Talarico if he won't even, when he needs us, come and speak with us and listen to our issues and develop a strategy to address our issues. And so to say, what are you going to do? Like vote Republican? Like they don't think we have a choice. They think that we have to vote for Talarico.
But what they understand is the couch is actually a choice. And we've seen it since Obama ran in 2008, 2012. You have seen a drop. You have seen a drop in black voter participation in every election. It's right.
All right, so talk about that, right? The couch is a choice. And you saw that happen in this most recent race between Kamala Harris and President Donald Trump. But, right, this is what I keep saying about the midterm elections for all those who are running right now in a midterm election. 2 things. The spending is going to be so much more than it was in 2022, which was that was a midterm election. But in addition to that, they're going to spend more in the midterm election than they did in the presidential election. That's the spending right now, right? And so whether that spending is on advertising for commercials that essentially, like they did with Kamala Harris, right? When they said they ran the most effective commercial from posters during that particular race was when they ran the "She's for they them, Donald Trump is for you." That had huge effects. Now, right, wrong, or different, not talking about how you feel on the ideology of it, but what I'm saying is that is what really resonated with a segment of the voting population, and that was enough to get people off the couch, out of their homes, and into the ballot box. So if the couch is a choice, then whoever is running in this particular election needs to pinpoint issues that get people off the couch, into their cars, and down to the ballot box, down to their precinct. In addition to that, though, it not only moves them, but it causes them to want to move members in the community to come out and do the same thing, right? It's a numbers game, because in the midterm election, you're playing with so much smaller of the numbers, because people just do not turn out, especially black people do not turn out. The person who wins that election is the ones who can bring more people to the table beyond the super voters, right? Beyond the 60 plus, 65 plus. He's talking about those baby boomers, people from my dad's generation who were actually grew up in Jim Crow segregation, who actually had to go to color bathrooms and color water fountains. Those people, unfortunately, they're making their transitions, right? They're aging out. So you're getting to another segment and demographic of people who did not experience that, people who don't really know the history on that beyond just a few talking points, and people who are resonating with the whole set of new issues. So you have to figure out, how do I connect with those people to get them to the ballot box? And what you need is, you need to invest in political aficionados who understand those different segments and who know how to speak to those different segments, whether it's the Latinos and the immigrants, or whether it's the Black Americans, so-called foundational Black Americans, and the African immigrants. You have to know how to talk to each one of those groups to get them to come out and support you, right? And that is one of the most important aspects of anybody who's running for office, is to understand you're dealing with a smaller number, because people do not turn out in midterm elections. More importantly, African Americans do not turn out in midterm elections.
They're in the numbers. I don't know what the hell they're looking at, and it's there in the data. I don't understand it.
But you know what I told her, Roland? I literally said, let me be clear. I have an option not to vote for Talarico. I can go vote for who I want to vote for, and I can literally skip that race. And Talarico needs our votes. But I also told her, what I'm going to need for you not to do, you literally are turning people away from the Democratic Party. You are purporting to speak for Democrats. The second you go tell somebody you don't, basically you too dumb to know how to vote, like you're making a bad decision, it's our fault being Black people's fault, that Republicans are winning, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, the second you move your mouth as a white person, in this case, a white woman, to go and complain about what Black people don't know, what they can't do, how stupid they are, why we're stuck in the situation we're in, to a Black person, I doubt very seriously whether the Black people agree with you. Some might push back. Some just won't say anything and be like, she crazy. And when you tell me I'm stupid and you tell me to do something, I'm going to do just the opposite. And so I told her, the second you get ready to move your lips to tell a Black person how dumb Black people are, I promise you, whether they tell you or not, you are hurting yourself. We ain't listening to you, and you're pushing people farther and farther away from the Democratic Party. So interestingly, and I was pleasantly surprised that she understood, because I told her, you need to listen to what I'm saying and not be defensive, because I agree with you. Paxton is terrible. If Paxton is a senator, things will be really bad. But I told her, at the end of the day, regardless of whether Democrats are in office or whether Republicans are in office, Black people always get the worst end of everything. And even when there's prosperity, Black people always receive the least amount of prosperity. So for us, it doesn't matter. And it's like, we damned if we do, if we damned if we don't. So if the point is to tell us, to put us down and not actually listen to us, like you're the boss and you know what's best for us, i.e. white man's burden, then you're pushing us away. We're not going to vote for you. And if you can either receive that and try to learn from it and try to learn from the Black perspective.
All right. So with that, another thing too is they have to do a better job of expanding the tent, right? Of expanding the people that they have these discussions with and connecting. Every cycle is the same names, it's the same playbook, and that is why they're not growing as a party. They're not growing as a party because they are only relying on the same think tanks, the same mindsets, and they can't really divert that much or move away from what they already understand and know. That's why you need to get new bodies, new voices at the table, and newer demographics, particularly younger demographics, at the table, because they help expand the thought. And I think that is what Republicans have been doing, is they're expanding the people in the Republican Party that exists. They're getting new names, right, at the table. And largely, I used to really question if I actually understood what the issues were. And for years and years, I watched, it's cycles. It's every 2 years, every 4 years. And I watched those who quote unquote know better and were doing worse. And so at that point, that's what just gave me the courage to just say, let me get up here on a microphone. I've studied this. I've been involved in this. I'm talking about over a decade of it. I've sat back for a long time, and I've watched the experts continue to devolve us. And this is not an indictment on anybody, but this is to essentially say that as long as you keep going to those same people and you're not opening and expanding, you're going to get the same results, which means you're going to remain stagnant, or you're going to do worse, and the numbers support that. We have not done as well as we did since the 2008-2012 days. We've just been going down further and further and further. But I think more importantly, when I talk about getting new voices at the table, I believe that if we did a better job at soliciting and finding talent in the off season, in the off years, and then we take that talent and we begin to invest in them. We work on their communication. We work on their fundraising. We work on their connections and network. We work on their awareness and understanding of the issues. We help them flesh out how to develop a policy, how to develop an analysis, how to do an assessment. Work on having conversations with the community where we're not there just for a vote because it's campaign season. I believe that if we do that, which means to simply just talk to people, invest in people, and build a bench so that if somebody gets into whatever it is, some type of controversy, you see what's happening right now in Maine with Plattner, if they get into some type of controversy, or if they DUIs, whatever it is, right? You have somebody next that you can invest in. But hopefully, if you're investing in people and you're developing the leadership, their morals and values, they won't get into those issues in the first place. I mean, that's the real thing, right? Then you will see better outcomes. But that's not what's happening. I don't want to make this whole segment about this, but that is just important because when we talk about Texas, we're talking about the largest Black eligible voter base in the country. Secondarily, and I cannot leave off without saying this, people in Georgia, my Georgians, you have a huge governor's race on your hand. You have Keisha Lance Bottoms, who has the opportunity to become the first African-American governor, of course, the first African-American woman governor in the state of Georgia. And Georgia also has, let me stop this, let me make sure I pull it off. All right, go back to our key findings. Remember, Georgia, you are in this as well. You between Georgia and Florida, you are the 2 second highest, right? So now, if Georgia Black voters turn out, and then if Keisha Lance Bottoms goes to those rural towns and those communities and talks to Georgians in those rural towns and communities, and understands what it is that they need, understands how to provide healthcare, extend healthcare and access to rural Georgians, or transportation issues to get a regional transportation and mobility. You're doing much better than Florida is, like, but to figure out how do you expand that. And to get them resources. You talk about more communities. People are against data centers. This crazy situation that happened. In fact, I think it was in Georgia with the data center where one of them was operating and was pulling from the utilities, but wasn't getting billed from it. And it was because it was an affluent area where this happened that they were able to speak to their politicians and get that data center issue resolved. But if people don't want data centers, talking to them to figure out, okay, well, what type of resources where is the job market going to go in Georgia? How do you preserve, protect, and expand people access? Like, as Keisha Lance Bottoms is trying to figure this out, whoever is on her team, they need to be sitting down at the table, having these conversations and putting together a campaign strategy plan and to be able to speak to these voters. And you cannot neglect the people who you think are on the other side of the aisle. You can't neglect them. You may not win them over, but you have to present messaging that also speaks to them. So Georgia, you are on the clock right now because you have a very important election ahead of you. That you cannot just sit on the sidelines with and use the same playbook and think that it's going to win out. So that's what I'll just say about that. It's a very good article here and research that is here talking about where regionally more than half of black eligible voters live in southern states at 57%. So if anybody has power, influence, and an opportunity to change the trajectory of things, it is the black Americans that are in African Americans that are in the South. The South is the seat of change. I mean, you look at it historically, civil rights movement, that's where all of the changes happen. So if the people in the South give up, if they don't strategize, if they don't plan, then where is the change going to occur? Because when you look at the data and the rest, I used to have a map. I don't think it's going to be on this thing, but I had a map to show that population and how it's broken down in these different segments. When you look at the West, the North, the South, and in the mid, or I think it was the East Coast. It is the South. That is the place where we can really shake things up. But when your psychology already has you defeated, then you don't attempt to strategize and go out there in the community to make these changes, even though historically all our efforts, whether it's the sit-ins, the freedom rides, whatever it is, all tells us that in the South, that's where these things germinate, and that's where change has always started in this country. So the seat of the South is where the power resides. There's no way that you can't understand that part of it, and maybe somebody hasn't communicated it to you, but the data supports that. What else? And I'm mean, just right here, just real quick. Black Americans are more likely to be eligible to vote than some other groups because a high share are ages 18 and older. So they're just looking at age. 73%, and even a larger share are citizens. So, right, citizenship, not dealing with the immigrant issue. You know, we see what's going on right now with immigrants, with the expiring of temporary protected status for Haitians, right? But the Black Americans, we don't have that particular issue. So we just have the ability to be able to go vote and participate in a democracy in its whole because we have all rights and benefits to that, even though we may not necessarily exercise that because we may be defeated, tired, or just whatever. But you have to ask what is on the other side of doing nothing, and it's going to be a worse off situation than we find ourselves in now. So, all right, let's move to, let's see, Switzerland just beat Colombia, I think, in a penalty shootout. Let's move on to our next topic for today. So this is our President Trump, right? So now, after courting black voters, Trump downplays black unemployment. He's glossed over persistently high unemployment among African Americans, a group he needs to secure for a second term. And you know what? Before we get into that, we are actually going to take us a brief break real quick to pay these bills. So I will get back with you in 1 minute. All right, so we're back. Okay, we're gonna get into this this next story pertaining to President Trump and what he was saying after courting black voters. So he downplayed black unemployment. So he was stating that 2024 campaign trail, President Trump said he was deeply concerned about the loss of black jobs under his predecessor. Now he's back in office, not so much. While Mr. Trump has for months cheered what he called record jobs, he's chosen not to dwell on the persistently high unemployment among a group he courted to secure a second term. The latest unemployment rate for black workers released last week was 6.6%, remaining the highest of any racial group, even as the national rate dipped slightly. When he was further discussing these reasoning for these high unemployment rates, one of the things that he championed was that he believes once he does this, First America, Build Back America plan and idea, is that he's going to bring manufacturing back into the country, i.e. meaning that factories are going to open. And so he now said that it's all coming back. It's amazing. And where your black worker is really going to do well is when those factories open. So I think they're going to be great. We've been doing well, and it's a big focus for me. He then further went on. We're going to talk about that. The factories is where we have the greatest opportunity in this land as Americans. During a speech to farmers in Wisconsin, next day, Mr. Trump celebrated the most recent jobs report and falsely claimed that the black unemployment rate was at a historic low. Now, mind you, I just told you it was at 6.6%. And it's higher than everybody else. And when he first came in 2019, the unemployment rate was down to 5.3%. But there's even a caveat and context to that. I'll tell you, this is something that's amazing. African American employment is now doing better than it's ever done. And I don't know where that stat came from, but I'll take it. I don't know where the hell the stat came from, but we'll take it. We'll just accept it. We won't do any analysis of it to identify if the claims are actually accurate. We'll just accept it, even though we don't know where it came from. And this is the mindset and thinking of our president of the United States. But going to what I was saying earlier, black unemployment reached a record low of 5.3% during Trump's first term. But that record was shattered by President Joseph R. Biden in 2023 when it fell to 4.8%. And so where do we go from here? We talk about the contributing factors to it. Was the issue with only thinking that blue collar work is what our capacity allows us to do, despite our intellectual prowessness? I don't even know where to essentially go with this, so we'll just talk about it. We'll just have a conversation of it, and wherever it goes, it flows. But in Trump's first term, when it was down, it was 2019, I think, when it got down to 5.3%, you have to also understand that there was a continuation of a improvement on the economy. So since I think like 2009 or so, of course, after the Great Recession, there had been this improvement in the economy that had been occurring. And so because there was also the 2017 Tax and Jobs Act, the 2017 tax cut that occurred, there was this idea that more jobs were going to create more businesses, and that would then provide better opportunities for employment opportunities to open up. And this was also coming off of the heels of the of COVID was about to start, right? So there's this continuation of all these policies and programs that are being put into place, and where these improvements are being made at, which provided for the opportunity for African Americans to find more employment, but it wasn't that it was a contributor from one particular president who did this. And then just the president even getting the overwhelming support when this is a whole economic infrastructure where there are a lot of different moving parts as to what contributes to that downturn. But I think what this leaves us is in a high stake of vulnerability when we are coming from the position. This may not be, I don't know, this may not be a popular take, but when we are coming from this position of that we're asking people to provide us with jobs, and we're not coming from the position as to where we want to create companies. We're not asking to provide us with the infrastructure, policies, the zoning regulations to allow us to create companies in our community. Therefore, we can provide jobs for the community. We're asking for outsiders to hire us. And so that leaves us into an area of vulnerability, especially when you look at the numbers, and it won't seem to match up and make sense when you talk about how many entrepreneurs we have, especially entrepreneurs in the Black community. But they're overwhelmingly essentially sole proprietorships, right? They're these companies that exist, but they don't have W-2 employees. So we're those of us, we're in business, we're CEOs of essentially ourselves, which means it was just a job. We're not adding an actual benefit, especially when you own a business and you really get the tax breaks, is when you have W-2 employees. So our strategy and our mindset has to make a shift into, especially for those who are at our HBCUs, as to where just getting into a position as to become great for building someone else's dream, but how do we build our own dreams? And then how do we also afford more opportunities within our communities to hire people so that the unemployment rate, we can be a very positive contributing factor to reducing the unemployment rate for our community. I think that is something that we need to have a conversation around and figure out how we navigate as well. I say the biggest shock to that, and understanding why that's so important too, is how many Black women lost their jobs in the federal government. You're talking about upwards of 300,000, right? They're working in the federal government before Trump comes in. And then once Trump comes into office, 300,000 women just lose their jobs, right? And so what protections existed for them, right? They were and of course you're working for the public, so you would think that more opportunities exist there perhaps, but they lost these jobs. And in the private sector, they may lose jobs as well, or they not find an opportunity to get hired into these different areas. And so it speaks to how important it is for us to not to become entrepreneurs, but also for us to have, again, intentional conversations with these companies. We looked like we was on a good path during the George Floyd, after the George Floyd incident, where all these companies made these agreements and they had these goals for the diversity, equity, inclusion, which we know that word has, or that phrase now has been really relegated into the mud pits, heads in the sand on that. But there was this opportunity for growth. But again, they were doing that because there looked like a societal shift and societal change was happening, especially during President Biden and Kamala Harris's presidency. But we see once Trump comes back in, where's the money at that was coming from those companies to these initiatives? Where is the hiring intentionality that was going to come from that? We see that largely a lot of those things were not held up to, and it was just only for a moment in a time. So what do we do to further insulate our abilities to be able to exist in these different firms, companies that we have? Because unfortunately, you still have people like Trump who think that we can only work in factories, or maybe only do domestic work or janitorial services, anything that's blue collar. But when it comes to finance, when it comes to politics, just engineering, just any of that, we don't have the ability, based and science backed job forces or job workforce opportunities. We don't have any opportunity or ability to do that. So that is very harmful towards a community as well. And so with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, that was an opportunity where they thought that lower corporate taxes was going to encourage investment and businesses would expand hiring. But we understand that most of that savings went to stock buybacks rather than job creation. In the end, job growth largely continued an expansion that was already underway. So it didn't start because of that. It was just a continuation of those, I think, 11 years of growth that was starting to happen. So the unemployment rate had already fallen dramatically because remember, it was at 10% around that 2009 time. And then when Trump took office in January 2017, there had been a reduction down to 4.7%. So again, it shows this pattern of improvement already starting to occur anyway. So Richard, I talked about that here, where it talked about he slashed the federal workforce, which dismantled the long-standing ladder to the middle class for Black Americans and gutted civil rights era policies that have helped address systemic discrimination. And you see some of the comments from Derek Johnson, said, stating that what Trump was saying was both racist and demeaning to suggest only jobs that blacks will be available will be for blue-collar jobs in factories. Of course, they're going to try to walk back and say that wasn't it. I mean, you talk, okay, so Allison Schuster, she mentions this opportunity zones, right? And we have some of these opportunity zones in the community where I'm at too. But the issue with these opportunity zones was sounded like a grandiose idea that was going to lift, like they say, a rising tide lifts all boats. Well, there was investment in these communities, but the investment did not transition for the people who have traditionally been in those communities. So now you have, like here, you have a traditionally African-American neighborhood, but you have these apartment complexes and these businesses coming in, but they're not hiring the people from out those neighborhoods. The owners of the businesses are not people from out of those neighborhoods. And so it gives this financial incentive to build there, but it gives no financial incentive to invest in the people that are there. There was no programs that essentially came in to train and to take people to understanding how do they leverage, whether it's CRA dollars or how do they leverage investments, developers and builders. Like, how do we create? One of the things I was telling my wife when I was riding around town, and I was just like, I do not know of any Black-owned apartment complexes nor Black-owned hotels in the community. And that's kind of crazy because there's an HBCU in the community, but you don't, and it's a whole lot of growth and building up happening around a community. But I'm like, does anybody know any black people who own apartment complex? I'm not talking about a 2-story complex with less than 50 units either. I'm talking about like more than that. A lot of these, what we knew, these new state of the arts with these multi-purpose, multi-use abilities where there could be living and, apartments, living in a nice pool, fitness area, but then on the bottom floor, there's shopping, what you start seeing. And I just think about like those, why don't we have that? Why don't we have those developers? Why don't we have those architects and people building or investors in the sort? Because, this is not a new issue. This is something that we've been dealing with for decades at this point. And so, it's just one of the thoughts that I was having and saying like, okay, well, where do we put our focus at? As they talk about here, think tank focused on issues affecting Black Americans. If national employment rate was this high, people will be talking recession, of course, but for Black Americans, that's normalized, which of course is problematic. And recognizing too, that the 6.2 is higher than the national rate of 4.2% and the 3.6% for white people. So there again shows this domino effect in this pattern of what's happening in our communities But what we're not doing, this goes back that we're not doing about it, but this also goes back to when we were just talking about politicians in the last segment of how do they invest and connect with our community and talk about first of all showing awareness of the issues, but then talk about the solutions to these issues, and where's the public-private partnership at that exists for us to all work together to improve these detrimental effects in our community. So that was just a segment because that came out today, and I think that that's important for us to know. And then also, of course, President Trump is pitting our community against the immigrant and migrant communities by stating that they're taking black jobs, whatever the hell that means. But again, it shows that there's this reductionist theory and idea that we're only beneficial for manual labor type jobs, and that even immigrants are only beneficial for manual labor type jobs, even though some of the top companies that exist in the United States of America were founded and operated by immigrants. Go figure. So again, we have to, it's a lot of times you just listen to the narratives and listen to some of the things that are said, and it tells you how certain people may think about you, or certain communities may think about you or feel about you, even if it's not an objective, reasonable outlook. But it's still important to recognize that, because then that can tell you where we may need to focus our concerns at to help improve these particular outcomes. So that's the story on that. And then, okay, cool. And then for our last one, so, I said I was going to end this talking about leadership and integrity. And so, when talking about leadership and integrity, you're investing your dollars, you're investing your faith into people, or you're a person who wants to work in the public trust, right? It is highly incumbent on you to really make sure psychologically that you're healthy, right? It's important for you to make sure that you have community around you and people who are going to hold you accountable as well, to make sure that you're accountable to somebody, because that helps you make decisions where you feel like there will be repercussions from people, especially those people that you love, care about, and you value their opinions. And so it's important to recognize that leadership is also developed, right? It's cultivated. Integrity, you should have that through morals, values, whether it's through your church or religion. But, sometimes that temptation will happen, and you have to make sure that you are in alignment with yourself and that you're on a path, because you have these goals, outcomes, and you recognize that you have a brand to protect as yourself. You have to look yourself in the mirror and be able to be honest with yourself when you wake up in the morning, before you go out and say what you were going to do, and then when you come back home, and what you said to your family, and what you said to yourself you're going to do before you lay down at night. And if you're not in that space and you haven't actually done that work, then you cannot find that place in a leadership role while you're in the midst of it, because so many things happen to you, so much temptation occurs, and you're offered certain things. And watching the situation that happened down, I think it was in Jackson, Mississippi, with the mayor, who he might not have been a mayor, but with the guy who was caught up in some bribes, who ended up, hold on real quick, who was it? Jackson. I was just reading about this yesterday. It might still be on my thing. Oh yeah, okay. So that was the former mayor of Mississippi, yeah, who pled guilty to bribery and fraud. I mean, and it's not just to call this particular person out, but it's just anybody who's in these leadership positions. I think the important thing is for you to really do the work and to read books about leadership, read books about positive thoughts, and really make sure that you are right with yourself before you jump into these positions, as to where you can end up hurting yourself, but hurting your family, hurting your reputation, because it's what we keep running into right now. Just because I don't think enough people have others that they can look at to have conversations about leadership, to have conversations about when you're tempted, or to have these open, honest conversations. And if you have nowhere to turn, you just feel like it's you in the moment, then you may slip up or whatever, or it may eat at you, and then you may feel like you need to turn to drugs or alcohol or whatever to relieve yourself of that mental pain. And we just need more people in our community to be of community and to provide resources for where others can go and find you people who are in alignment, find you people who are trying to do the right things as well, people who have goals and ambitions, and that way you each can be accountable to each other for your actions and things as well. And even if you do make a mistake, be willing to accept, be willing to admit to that mistake. But then I think more importantly too, I think our communities are really running into a time as to when I saw this happening years ago, but where we can't criticize each other anymore. Criticism helps to make you aware of yourself and make you aware of your blind spots. But if we constantly go through life saying that, well, you can't judge anybody and people make mistakes, and just to write it off as if that's okay, then nobody learns from those lessons, and then people end up making mistakes. Because they say you do something one time, then that's a mistake. You do something twice, then it was a choice. But because they feel like nobody is going to be able to say anything to them, because they're constantly seeing this where we're automatically just letting people off the hook. And criticism is healthy. Criticism is healthy for growth. Criticism is healthy for development. Criticism is necessary. But if people keep coming to you and you're doing stuff and everybody is just patting you on the back, rubbing you on the shoulder, saying, oh, it's okay, then it only sends signals to other people, especially our youth, that they're able to essentially offend, and all will be forgiven because can't nobody judge. And it's not working out. It's not helping us out, because like I said, we've been watching this for a long time where this has been happening. And there's not many people who will go through these situations and go through these things and they end up not offending again. So leadership is integrity is, of course, highly important, but it's like a muscle. You have to work it out. You have to learn how to get better at it. You have to do research on leadership. If you're talking about you're going to be a leader, but you don't know the seven keys of leadership, or the seven styles of leadership, then your leadership is going to be ineffective at some point. So a lot of us want to step into the spotlight. But the question before you step into the spotlight is, have I done the work on my psychological trauma? Have I done the work on my emotional trauma? Have I done the work to learn about what true effective leadership is? Have I done the work? Can I honestly say that I responded in the most efficient ways when my integrity was on the line? When temptation presented itself, how did I respond? Do I have a community in which I can go to, a community of men, if you're a male, a community of women if you're a woman, that I can go to where we have these tough conversations and I can be vulnerable, and I have somebody who's accountable who will tell me, hey, bro, put that extra drink down. Bro, you drove over here, but you got too many drinks. I'm sending you home in an Uber, or I'll take you home and then we can come back and get your car in the morning. Like, have those types of people, because unfortunately there are people who won't say nothing to you and don't want to say nothing to you when something happens. And those are the most harmful people in your circle. They are a detriment to society. So that's what I'll just say about leadership and integrity as you begin to develop, work, and try to improve yourself. So again, this was a segment on House of Aten. Just brought you a couple of, I think, important news stories from the day. I definitely appreciate you for listening. And if you take the time out to listen, please share it, like, comment, engage, dialogue. Like I said, man, I've been sitting on the sidelines for a long time because I just didn't think my ideas were probably the best, or my way and approach to life is the best. But I'm seeing us fall so far. I'm seeing so many people that I know fall so far from grace and fall so far down, or I'm watching it seems like our communities are getting worse. The next generation is just seeming neglected. And I also say, well, heard, you can't criticize where you don't work. So for me, everybody knows that I volunteer. I work in the communities. I work with kids. I work with other men and helping to develop and build them up. So as I work in these particular areas, then I have all license to criticize because I'm actually working to make improvements in those areas and not just sitting on the sideline. As they say, Monday morning couch quarterbacking and just pointing everything out, but not doing anything to help fix it. So I'll see y'all soon enough for another segment. Y'all have a wonderful night. Peace.